The first Ribbit-based article on NetTuts dealt with building the user interface. It had nothing to do with any server-side code. So we're going to take these files and use it as a basis for our views. The title of this article is Build a Twitter Clone from Scratch, the design. Just download the source files, and let's extract the zip archive. The static assets that we will want within our application are the images inside of the GFX folder, the less.js file, and the style.less. We can take these files from Explorer and just drag them into our solution. There are a few modifications that we need to make to the less file. First of all, we need to find any URL that is referencing an image, and we need to put a slash before it. This will tell the browser to load this resource starting from the root. So this is actually going to use the URL of the root of our application /gfx/bg.png. We will do this for every static resource within our views and within this less file. So an easy way of doing this is to use the search and replace. I don't think that there are many instances of this in the less file, but it's just quicker to do it this way. So do a search for the open parenthesis and then GFX, and then you will want to replace that with an open parenthesis /GFX. Replace all, and there were only 3 occurrences there. We will need to display some error messages, or messages in general, to the user, so we need to add some classes for those messages. We'll start with the class of Flash. It'll have a padding of 10 pixels and a margin of 20 pixels and 0. There will be 3 different types of Flash messages. We'll have one that's going to be called error, which will have a background of FFEFEF. The foreground color will be 4C1717. And then we'll have a 1 pixel border with the same color as our foreground. The other 2 types of messages are called warning and notice. And I am just going to paste those in because you don't need to see me type those. Now there are a few more modifications we need to make to this file. They are tweaks in order to make things line up on the screen. So you can either make those changes yourself, or you can use the code from my download. And I'm just going to paste that code in, because without some of these tweaks, things just kind of look a little weird. It's nothing major or application breaking. It's just a few little tweaks here and there, making text boxes a little larger, a little smaller, and things like that. We no longer need this less file open, so let's close that. And let's go to our views folder. Let's right click and add a new folder called shared. We're going to start our layout page. So let's go to our layout files that we downloaded, and we want this home.html. Just drag that over to shared. We will need to rename it to _layout.cshtml. First, I want to change the static resources to have a slash before the URL. So for the style sheet, style.less, we will have a slash before that, a slash before less.js. We need to find the images. Our logo needs to have a slash before that URL. This image here is not going to be inside of our layout page, but we'll go ahead and we'll add a slash there for now. And I think the only other place is down here at the bottom with the logo in the footer. So add a slash there, and that is it. Now we can start defining sections that we can then use inside of our views. Let's start with the content, because we have some very well defined sections here. First of all, we have our content, which is basically everything inside of our wrapper div element, and that is not inside of a panel. So basically this image here is our content. So I'm going to comment this out, and we are getting HTML style comments. We should be getting razor comments. So let's close this file. Let's open it back up. And now let's comment the image on line 20. There we go. So now let's just call the render body method. So any content inside of the view is going to be displayed here with the render body. Next, we have a panel on the right-hand side of the screen. So we can get rid of this form here and all of the HTML inside of this div element, and we can render a section, and we will call it panel right, or let's do right panel. Now we also have a left panel. It's not inside of this particular page, but if we go and look at our public page, you will see a panel left. Here's our panel right. This will contain the form for creating a new ribbit if a user is logged in, and then you can see this panel left, which displays all of the ribbits. So for the left panel, we can just copy our right panel and then change right to left. Now I mentioned that the right panel will typically contain the form to create a new ribbit. We won't always need to show that form. Like for example, if we are editing our own profile, we don't need to see the form to create a ribbit there. So it kind of makes sense to make this optional, but we don't want to just make the right panel section optional. We want to make this entire panel optional. And we can do that. We can check to see if the view has a section defined called right panel, and if so, then we can display this markup. So we first of all need to check, is section defined? And we want to check for right panel. And if it is, then we will simply display this markup. So we will wrap all of this within the curly braces for the if statement, and that's it. And we might want to do the same thing for the left panel. So let's just copy that if statement. Let's change it from right to left, and then we will add the closing curly brace. And let's let Visual Studio format our document, although it didn't really do a good job there, did it? So that's the content of our layout page. Let's focus on the header. And really, the logo and the text of Twitter Clone is static. It's going to be there for every page. So anything after that inside of our header wrapper element is going to be variable. And really, this is only going to be one of two things. If the user is logged in, they will see a bunch of links for seeing their followers, who they are following, the different profiles, and editing profiles. And then if the user is not logged in, then they will see the login form. In order to determine if a user is logged in, we need our security service class. Well, really, we don't need our security service class. We could just look at the session itself, but no, I don't want to do that. I want to use the security service class. So we can kind of do what we did with our base controller. We can create a base view page that will have a security property, which is basically going to be our security service. Let's first open up the web config file inside of the views folder. Now don't confuse this with the web config file at the root of our project. I do this all the time. I'll open up the wrong web config file and then I'm wondering, where are my settings? Well, there are two web config files. The one inside of the views folder contains setting for our Razor view pages. In fact, on line 11, you can see that we have an element of system.web.webpages.razor. Inside of this contains some very nice features that we can modify. One is this pages element. It has an attribute of page-based type, and then it's set to system.web.mvc.webpageview. This is the base class that all Razor view pages inherit from. So we can change this value to our own custom base class, and then all of our Razor pages will inherit from that class, and this is what we are going to do. But we can also import namespaces so that we don't have to do that inside of the view itself. You can see that there are 4 namespaces automatically imported. So we could add our own namespaces here, and then we wouldn't have to worry about those namespaces inside of our views. So let's add the namespace for our models namespace. So we would want ribbitmvc.models. And we can do the same thing for our services, which is ribbitmvc.services. There's another namespace that we're going to add later on called ribbitmvc.viewModels, but since we don't have that namespace yet, we're not going to add it. Now I'm going to add a new folder to the project called UI, and this is going to contain the base class that we are going to use for our Razor view pages. I'm going to call this Ribbit View Page, and this needs to inherit the web view page of the system.web.mvc namespace. The web view page class is an abstract class, so we can do one of two things. We can either implement the abstract members of web view page, or we can just make our Ribbit view page abstract. And we don't really need to implement those members, and plus making it abstract is a lot easier. And I'm just going to paste in this code. Now, there's a slight little difference than what I used in the controller base class. And in fact, we will need to go back to the controller base class and make these modifications. Really, the only difference is this data context field. This is so that if we need to inherit from Rivet view page, like to add another service, then we have that data context readily available. And then we could use that for whatever other service that we need. Now, this isn't the only class that we need to write. We need the generic version of this class. So this is going to have a type parameter, which I'm going to call tModel, and then the web view page also needs to have that same type parameter. And so now we can go back to our web config file, and we can change this page base type attributes value to ribbit mvc.ui.ribbit view page. And then in our layout page, we can add an if statement. If security.is authenticated, then we will want to show the links. And let's close out of this file and let's open it back up. In fact, let's just do a build because IntelliSense should be working here for our views. So let's open up layout once again, and let's see if we get IntelliSense. We do now. So we just made our lives a little bit easier. Let's go back to our controller base class while I'm thinking about it, and let's add that protected field. So I'm just going to copy that and paste in that protected field, and then we need to initialize that in the constructor. So we will set data context, and we will new it up with the context constructor. Then we can pass data context to our user service. And then if we need to create another controller class that inherits from base, then we can have that data context that we could pass to another service. Something else that we should really do here is override the dispose method because we have a data context that we need to dispose. So we will do public override and then dispose. We do need to call the base classes dispose, but before we do that, let's first check if data context is not null, and then let's dispose of it. Now we shouldn't need to wrap this in a try catch because we did that in the context and in the repositories. So everything should be golden here. So whenever our controller is disposed, our data context will be disposed of as well. Well, let's get back to our layout page. Whenever we check to see if the user is authenticated, we want to display the set of links that represents our menu. So we're going to use a nav element, and then we are going to have our links. We're going to use the HTML helper class, and we're going to use the route link method. This is the most reliable way of generating links. And since we have so many entries in our routing table, then it just makes it a little bit easier for things like the followers, following profiles, and things like that. So there's our followers link, and I'm just going to paste in the rest of those links. So we have the followers, the following, the profiles, and then we have the link to edit our profile. Then we need a log out button. So let's have a using statement, and we'll create a form using the html.beginForm method. The action is log out on the account controller, and we will simply have an input element that says log out. Inside of the else, we will have the login form, and we're not going to add that form right now. We'll just add some placeholder text, your login form. And let's put this in a span element so that the Razor View Engine knows that this is HTML, not C# code. The last thing I want to do is add the HTML for the Flash error messages. It makes sense to put this in the layout page because we might want to display error message regardless of what view is currently being loaded. This should go inside of the content before we render the body. So we first of all want to check if the model state is valid. So we want to use viewData.modelState and then use the isValid property. And then inside we will have a div element with a class of Flash and error. And then inside of this div element, we will call html.validationSummary. Next, let's create the view start file so that all of our views will automatically use our layout page. So right click on views, add new item, and we can pick any of the Razor view choices. I'm just going to pick the one at the top. Let's call this _view start This wants us to pick a layout page. It really doesn't matter because we're going to, actually, that's exactly what we need. I was going to paste in that exact code, but Visual Studio automatically added that for me. So let's create a view, the landing view, which is one of the views returned by the home controller's index action method. So right click on this method, go to add view. We will call this landing. We don't want this strongly typed right now. We will actually change this in the next lesson. So just leave that unchecked. This is not a partial view, and we are using a layout page. It's specified within the view start, so just click on add. Let's change the title to Ribbit. And we do not need this H2 element, but we do have content for this view. It is the image that we commented out in our layout. So we can just grab that, and in fact we can just get rid of that comment completely, and let's paste it into the landing page. So that's our content, and we need something for the right panel because this is where our sign up form is going to be. So section right panel, and then we will have an H1 element that says new to Ribbit, and then we will have a paragraph element which will contain our form. And that's where we are going to stop with this lesson. We're going to pick up right here in the next lesson where we will add our sign up form. We will also add the view model namespace because we are going to start writing some view models. And we will also add the code to actually create the user in our controller.